you have all of that in the Enneagram, the thing that points to your unique brilliance and your unique trap. And the trap and the brilliance are on a spectrum with each other. And when you, just like nirvana and samsara are inseparable, I have heard, the passion and the virtue are inseparable.
Welcome to the Road Home podcast with Ethan Nichtern. Join Ethan as he and his guests explore the Buddhist path as it relates to art, culture, activism, politics, Western psychology, and more. If you'd like to support Ethan's podcast, please visit BeHereNowNetwork.com/Ethan.
So, hi, everyone. This is Ethan Nichtern, the Road Home podcast. I'm really happy to have a returning guest on the podcast, though she hasn't been here in a while. Author, Buddhist teacher, badass. That's not in her title, but I give her that title. Susan Piver. Welcome back.
Oh, Ethan, so great to see you. That's my favorite introduction. Absolutely. Thank you.
So I want to talk about your new book, but I guess, it's summer 2022. I guess the question is like, how are you? Is the question that could take up like the whole podcast, asking someone that question, but how are you?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for asking. I am okay right now. And generally speaking, I would say, and on the same roller coaster ride that everyone else is. Will our planet exist? Will our democracy survive? Will women go back to being chattel, and so forth? So, no one can really be okay when those are actually questions. But otherwise, I know we're going to talk about the book soon, but writing this book, I'd say in combination, writing this book and being liberated, quote unquote, from my sangha of long standing because of clergy sexual misconduct, those two things have really made me look to my own authority. And try to hold that authority with the right ratio of humility to confidence. I'm sure you have some similar. I imagine you have similar.
For sure. And I wanted to talk about that in terms of, and maybe that's a really good framing for the sort of the underlying view of our or intention of our discussion today, because I think. So let's just bring everyone up to date. Your brand new book is called The Buddhist Enneagram: 9 Paths to Warriorship. And this book does represent your own, it's two fields you've been interested in studying, practicing for a while, but your own very personal synthesis of two historically unrelated spiritual frameworks or traditions, the Vajrayana or Tantric Buddhist teachings and the system of the Enneagram. So maybe that's sort of part of this discussion is synthesizing different traditions or different frameworks of wisdom. So can you talk a little bit about sort of the origins of this book in terms of finding your own authority from studying these two things?
Yeah, thank you very much for that frame. Well, I've been interested in studying and contemplating and trying to practice both of these things, as you say, for a long time. Now it's like 25 years. And I never thought of them together. I just knew I was really interested in both, the Vajrayana Buddhist path and the Enneagram. But I kept discovering over the years that in attempting to practice what is most vital in the Vajrayana path, or among the most vital things, being compassionate in the largest possible view of what that means, and being awake in the largest possible view of what that means. Every time I turned around, just think, well, what's going to help me do these things? I've read these teachings, I've practiced things, and it makes sense, and I want to do it, but I'm still a jerk, and I'm still just a puny human. What can help me meet the things that are most challenging? And every time I asked the question, the answer was the Enneagram. Well, every time, maybe it's a little bit of an exaggeration, but the Enneagram is an upaya. I started to think, it's an upaya, a skillful means that helps deepen compassion in various situations. And I noticed that I was relying on it constantly. And also to help me see around the habitual patterns of my own mind to some small degree, which is key to being awake. So at some point, I just started talking about it in my own online Sangha, the Open Heart Project. And I first started talking to friends about it. And then I taught little classes, and then I kept teaching introductory classes online. And then it just seemed like there was something to say that was of interest, just not just me. Makes sense?
That makes a lot of sense. I think we've heard a little bit about how you got your start in meditation and Buddhism. Was there sort of a moment that you heard about the framework of the Enneagram, or that was revelatory, or how did you become I don't know, what's the right word? Enthralled with it, or?
Enthralled is a great word. I don't really know, but here's what I think. I think, and this experience is not unique to me. Many, many people have had this experience with the Enneagram. I probably read the book, The Enneagram by Helen Palmer, which came out in like 1992 or something like that. And that was it, because what I discovered from reading that book, which I also discovered, for better or for worse, from reading the books of Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche, which are very, very important to me. In both cases, what I read, I discovered was already in my mind. I just didn't know it was in my mind. And I can't say that's a good thing or a bad thing. It just is. So the Enneagram, I just started to see the whole world through the lens of the Enneagram. It made sense. Like the deepest teachings that we have encountered, you and me, they just make sense. And so starting from that point, there were almost no other books to read about the Enneagram at that point. But then I just would read anything that came out, and I started talking to people about it, and it just was in my own mind. And TLDR here, I think I've come to think it's a terma, a treasure, not a Buddhist terma, but terma-like, in that it is a fully formed teaching that was not authored by anyone. It was perhaps discovered by various people, but not authored. So I find that really, really heartening and interesting and mysterious and maybe crazy.
So just to unpack, because I think this is a really important point to get back to, like, trusting one's own authority to sort of develop your own practice and maybe your own kind of path as both student and teacher. So the notion of terma is specific to the one particular Tibetan Buddhist tradition, right? And it had a mythology associated with it that the founder of Tibetan Buddhism, Padmasambhava, who's basically in Tibetan Buddhism is considered like a second, like a tantrically oriented Shakyamuni Buddha, that he left treasures, like treasure teachings, almost like a Goonies kind of situation, like to be uncovered by future generations of teachers at future times when they were relevant. And, we kind of came of age in the Tantric tradition that the Shambhala teachings were one such body of termas. And so the idea is that there's a future revelations that are possible, but somehow are linked back with kind of original lineage of wisdom at the same time, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's kind of an egoless quality in the sense of like whoever discovers them, which they could be discovered either in the mind stream of a practitioner, like just as insight, or they could literally be like a text, like buried under a rock that somebody treasure revealer finds, right? So
Yes.
I mean, that's a really interesting mythology for like the revelation of new wisdom within a system.
That's my conclusion at this moment in time, because if you go back to look for an author, I mean, I have looked, and I'm happy to talk about that if that's of interest. You won't find one, and if you look for a central figure, like this is the person to study with, you won't find them. Yeah. It's completely decentralized, and like mindfulness or meditation, fits a million different agendas. So like mindfulness is like, oh, it's a path to enlightenment. Oh, guess what? It'll make you a better athlete and help you get a better night's sleep. The Enneagram, I think, works with Buddhism. Many great current teachers consider the Enneagram in light of biblical values. And that totally works for them. It works as a workplace system for cultivating leadership, and it's very tofu-like. It can adapt to whatever environment you put it in.
But there's literally no known originator of the system. There's no Siddhartha Gautama. There's no Padmasambhava. There's no
If anyone listening knows who it is, call us. Let me know. But I could tell you a little story about what is known about the origins. So the first, I think all Enneagram lovers can agree that the first person in recorded history to say the word Enneagram was Gurdjieff, the Greek Armenian mystic of the 40s and 50s, I think, maybe 30s. And he taught it to his students not as a system of personality typing, which it is most often thought of today, but as a way of understanding natural cycles. And he made up dances for each of the 9. And I never studied his teachings on it, but that's the first. And when his student said, where did you find this? Where did this come from? He said he saw it in a cave in what is now some part of a cross-section of Afghanistan and Pakistan. Okay, he was a crazy wisdom guy, so who knows? Or maybe just a crazy guy, but I don't think so. Then if you fast forward like 20 years, 25 years, a guy in South America named Oscar Ichazo presented the Enneagram as we know it today. It was the 60s, I think, or the early 70s, and he just said, here it is. Now, where did he get it? He said he was trained very vigorously by a circle of wisdom elders. I don't know what that means. And the archangel Metatron was involved. I really don't know what that means. Okay, I'm going to try to not make a joke. That's what he said. So one of his early students was a Chilean psychiatrist named Claudio Naranjo, quite brilliant, extraordinary human being. And they both just died within the last few years. He was bereft. He had lost his 17-year-old son in an accident. And he went and did ayahuasca-like things with Oscar Ichazo in the Arican desert and had actual enlightenment experiences that he said lasted for some years, not for the rest of his life, but for some years. And then he became a professor at UC Berkeley in the 70s and started teaching his students in small groups the Enneagram. But he said, you can't write it down. This can only be orally transmitted because it's too powerful and too easy to misuse for manipulative purposes. Mm-hmm. So that did not last very long because some people wrote it down. One of them was Helen Palmer, who was the first book I read about the Enneagram. And when I started studying it, people said it's from Sufism. Oh, I didn't question that at the time. Like, oh, okay, that's cool. Then I happened to be talking to a Western Sufi sheikh and very esteemed scholar, published many, many books, many, many important books about Sufism. I said, do you guys have the Enneagram? He said, no. Well, he didn't know about it. Then later he sent me something in an email. He discovered something in the Quran that describes the 9 types of men, which was very interesting. Okay, this is my last piece of the story.
And this is all in the Buddhist Enneagram
yes.
as well, in your book. Yeah. But it's a great story. I was fascinated.
Thank you. Oh, I'm so glad because it's a long one. So then I was like, okay, the only person who knows where it came from, probably that's living, is Claudio Naranjo. And it turns out that he is a Buddhist and a Nyingma student, much as we are.
Same lineage that invented the idea of terma. That's the particular lineage that terma comes from.
Exactly. So I made up a lie because, I don't know. That's how I operated back then, I guess. Hey, Claudio, I'm going to be in Berkeley. Excuse me. And I'd like to talk to you about the Enneagram and the 5 Buddha wisdoms, which I'm sure you've talked to your podcast listeners about.
We have. We had our friend Kevin Townley on recently, who, if anybody wants to, whose book really does an amazing job mapping the 5 wisdom energies onto visual art and the work and biographies of well-known visual artists over the last several centuries. I was shocked at how it's a very niche book in some ways, but I was actually not that I ever doubted Kevin's intelligence or wisdom, but it was shockingly well done. So we have some orientation on this podcast to the 5 wisdom energies, but it's a tantric Buddhist mapping.
That's so great.
Emotional energy, personality. Yeah.
That book is so effing good. It's so profound. It's so funny. It's so rich. It's so unexpected. It's a missing link. I just think that Kevin's book is extraordinary. And I'm so glad that you talked to him about it. And if anybody wants that book, it's called Look It Again.
You have to get the number of looks right.
That's right. I have to count it on my fingers. Otherwise, I'm not sure if I've added one too many. So I said, can I come over and talk to you about that? And he said, yes. And then I bought a ticket to Berkeley because I was in Boston. I had no plan to be in Berkeley. But then I went to his house. And by the way, he said, I think I wrote this in the book. Yeah, I have mapped the Buddha families and the Enneagram, and I'll send you what I've written, but you can never tell anyone. So he did send it to me. I've never told anyone. Anyway, he said, among other things, I just told my students Sufism because they kept bugging me about where it came from. So I said Sufism. So I don't know if that's true, a secret truth, or because Gurdjieff did the same thing. So that's the best I got.
Yeah. So it is sort of fascinating in terms of claiming one's own authority that even if you desire to really understand this lineage, you can't really get to the root of where the lineage came from. I find this a fascinating conversation because there's so much going on as we're in this sort of brave new world of traditions, people taking pieces of traditions, and there's so much critique of Western, especially white people taking little bits of different traditions that come from indigenous wisdom or that come from, Eastern yoga, Hinduism, Buddhism, and just sort of claiming, them for whatever coaching, wellness work, we're doing. And so it's interesting that like nobody claims this, right? So it almost feels like it can't be stolen in a sense.
That is I love everything you just said so much. And I never really thought of it that way. But yes, it can't be co-opted. Of course, everyone can co-opt it, but not really. So in that sense, we're all co-authoring it. We're authoring it together. You can't identify a starting point. So it's, there's no copyright infringement. It's public domain.
Yeah. Similar to astrology in a sense, right?
I guess so. I don't know the history of it. Yeah, but I guess whatever the history is, it's everybody's now.
So okay, let's go one level deeper into, if you can do like sort of a quick overview. You don't have to describe all 9 types, but the basic framework of these 9 or 3 groupings with 9 types of what would we say? Personality, energy.
Energy.
Ways of being in the world. So you
ways
call
to
it,
being.
The subtitle of your book is The 9 Types of Warriorship, right? So,
yes.
So explain the 9 to us, but
Sure.
briefly.
Briefly, yes, I will go briefly. Thank you for that, because don't get me started, Ethan. So Ennea is the Greek prefix for 9. And the Enneagram is a circle with 9 numbers around it. 1, 2, 3, 4 on the right side when you're looking at it, 5, 6, 7, 8 on the left, and 9 at the top. And just as you say, a good place to start is just notice that the 9 types are divided into 3 groups of 3 according to central intelligence, center of intelligence. So we all have all these kinds of intelligence, but for each of us, one of them predominates. We each have, and for some, the energy of intuition or instinct predominates. Second intelligence is emotional intelligence, and the third intelligence is mental intelligence, or the intelligence of mentation is a better way of saying it. So 8, 9, and 1 are the intuitive triad. 2, 3, and 4 are the emotional triad. 5, 6, and 7 are the mental triad. And one way to start identifying the differences is to look at the usual default response to stress. So if you're an intuitive type, whether you're an 8, 9, or 1, you're like going through your life. This is I know where I'm going. I don't know how I know. I just know I'm going. And then something interferes, you get angry. This is way overly broad, but let's just say it's also called the anger triad. 2, 3, and 4, when things don't go their way, the emotions go out of whack as the emotional triad. So their responses to stress could look like depression or grasping. 5, 6, and 7, the mental triad, when things don't go their way, thinking speeds up. What if I did this? What if I shouldn't have said that? What if I go over here? If this happens, I'll do that, and so on. And that's called anxiety or fear. So it's sometimes called the fear triad. Within each of these triads, we'll use 8, 9, and 1 as an example. There's a central number, in this case, obviously 9, and then a number on either side, which is an inside-out version of the central number. So 8 is a version of 9, and 1 is a version of 9. The central number in each triad, 9, 3, and 6, in this case, is numb to its essential quality. So 9s can't read their own intuitions, and 3s don't know how they feel or can't find their hearts. 6s aren't sure that what they think is accurate. Another number, in this case 8, overexpresses the core quality of instinct, intuition in this case, so everything's put out into the environment. And the third type, in this case 1, introjects the core quality, holds it in, reserves it. So that's a very general overview of how the types sort of shake out.
So it feels like anytime there's a framework, right? And there's a framework for kind of understanding one's way of being in the world. And it's interesting because there's always the wisdom side is you kind of, by understanding the framework and understanding something of the resonance of your place in that framework, you get a sense of like, oh, here's who I am and here's how I navigate situations. And it also feels like there's a danger, just like with astrology, of reductivism or, like pigeonholing us or, pigeonholing. Before I got into astrology, which I've opened up to more in recent years, I used to joke that anybody who's really into astrology could tell you what sign you are right after you just told them. Oh, you're such a Cancer,
Right.
So that co-emergent quality of how descriptive this is of our personality versus how, we might feel pigeonholed or kind of hold on to the personality that this gives us. How do you work with, do you feel that, or do you just feel like, no, this is good descriptiveness?
Both. I feel both. So that's why the original teachers said, you can't tell anyone. You can't write it down. It has to be taught person to person because it can be used in so many bad ways. It can be used to solidify your sense of self, which is incorrect use. It can be used to ghettoize others by saying, oh, you're such a Cancer, I mean a 3, and therefore you're always going to do this and you're never going to do that. That's misuse, misuse, misuse. So it depends on the user. If you use it to expand your mind, it will expand it. If you use it to make yourself feel safe, it will constrict. So just like the Buddha families, the Enneagram posits a poison and a wisdom for each type. And just like the 5 Buddha families, the poison and the medicine are not different. They are, one is a confused version of the essential energy, and the other is the enlightened version of the essential energy. So in this case, for Buddhist families, the Vajra family, the poison is anger, and the virtue is serenity. And though in this view, those are the same thing. It's serenity is what you get when you feel the sharpness of anger without the storyline. Something to consider. Enneagram also has poison to medicine spectrum for each type, but they call them passions and virtues. Passion doesn't mean good, I'm passionate about. It means I'm in the grips of. So you have all of that in the Enneagram, the thing that points to your unique brilliance and your unique trap. And the trap and the brilliance are on a spectrum with each other. And when you, just like nirvana and samsara are inseparable, I have heard the passion and the virtue are inseparable. So it gives you a place to step into what you think is you so that you can start to soften around it and have a greater chance at waking up. And one last thing, there's a wonderful teacher named Eli Jackson Bear who wrote one of my favorite books on the Enneagram called Freedom from Fixation, but he published it under several titles, so I'm not sure what the latest one is. And he's an Advaita, and he says the Enneagram is who you are not. So we all have ego solidification, for lack of a better phrase. And if you want a roadmap to show you who you think you are, but is incorrect, then this is one.
Yeah. So that framework, to use the Tantric Buddhist word for, the co-emergence of wisdom and confusion. I mean, it seems like there are a lot of systems that are trying to, kind of understand things. I don't want to say at a higher level, but sort of a more mature level, like seeing this sort of the co-emergence of wisdom and confusion in a lot of our patterns. Like I think of, a lot of people I know in Western psychology are studying internal family systems where there's a sense of having parts, and those parts are neither good nor bad. They're they're kind of playing a role in the map of self, and we need to sort of understand our parts, and so it seems like this conversation on kind of co-emergent wisdom and confusion, is really crucial, right? To sort of understanding like how the world, works beyond good and bad, right? We're moving into sort of more awake and confused versus good and bad, or helpful and harmful, or skillful and unskillful, and it's interesting that, like, I've spent a lot of time analyzing, situations through the 5 wisdoms, which is why I appreciated, Kevin's book on art and the 5 wisdoms, because it seems such a beautifully applied, thinking of Donald Trump as rotten neurosis run amok, and what is actually attractive versus so, dangerous about that, feels like a much more evolved way of looking at the situation, than he's awful, he's a horrible person. So I'm just wondering if you talk a little bit about this sort of basic frame of co-emergence and why you find that so important.
Yeah. Well, I really wish I'd written that in the book about co-emergence. So if there's ever a reprint, I'm going to say it. So thank you. And I will attribute it to you, because I just didn't think of it as an example of co-emergence, but of course it is. So here's an example for me, as I'm a 4 on the Enneagram. And this is just for me. And not all 4s are like this. But for many years, I thought, I wish I was a better friend to the people I love, because I always seem to feel like I leave them lacking. I'm not in touch with them. I don't check in. I don't invite them to things. I don't know. I wish I was a better friend, because I love my friends and I love having people in my life that I love. And I kept trying to be a better friend. But I always felt like it was a stretch for me, not to be a good friend, but just this kind of a friend. And then when I sort of looked at my 4-ness in terms of this question, which is an interiorized type of an introjected emotional type, I realized I'm never going to be that kind of friend. I'm not going to be the kind of friend that wants to hang out or have chats. I like hanging out, I like chats, but that's not ever going to be my strength as a friend. However, if you're being born or dying, call me, because I will be there and I will be heart to heart with you and stand there with you. So that's my gift as a friend, or my capacity, probably a better word. And so I just sort of stopped haranguing myself. I don't know if this is a good example of co-emergence, but I want friendship and I want to be a good friend. And I want friends in my life, like deeply, deeply, deeply. The way I was going about it, or the way I was valuing myself as a friend, was according to someone else's metric. And when I let that go and just saw, well, this is the kind of friend I can be, everything got easier in the realm of friendship, and quieter and sweeter.
Right. Yeah. I mean, and it's fascinating. So for what title of warriorship? I can't remember. It's the individualist, according to some. What would you give what would your title for 4 be?
My title for 4 is the warrior of poetics. So each type has a warriorship journey. And 4s, the way I describe them is, if you hold a tuning fork in each hand, and if you don't know what a tuning fork is, Google it. But if you hit one and it starts to vibrate, the other one starts to vibrate in response, even though you didn't hit it. So that's how 4s go through the world, just sort of vibrating in response to what is present. So 4s can be very, very, very self-absorbed position, because we think that what's happening out here is happening in here. However, there's also the capability to feel the symbol, or the sambhogakaya-ness, or the sort of formless quality of what takes form. That's a bad way of saying it. But what do poets do? You're a poet, so you know that you sort of take something that you experience or that you think about, and then you poeticize it. You express it in a way that reveals it. And whether it's about a tree or, God or whatever. So fours have a genius for poetics, for the underlying meaning of things. But each of the types has a form of genius.
Right.
And they're all really the best.
Yeah. But it's interesting in terms of like knowing who you are as a four,
Mm-hmm.
and realizing that there may have been messages from the conventional world about that being somehow socially off in terms of, it meaning that you're failing at friendship or failing at some social obligation. And that's, I'm thinking right now, not that this is your experience, but just like reading an article about introverts. And I know what I'm about to say is also true often of people on the autism spectrum, but it was just saying introverts often, they've discovered, are more sensitive to sound than other people, right? So that would cut out a lot of high level socializing, right there. And it's neither good nor bad. Just having that information of like, oh, this is how I work, and there's a wisdom side to that,
Exactly.
Get me one-on-one in a very important, when we are discussing the great matters of life and death, as the Zen teachers say, I'm there. Yeah.
Exactly. And if you stop trying to be an extrovert when you aren't one, because you think you should, then a lot of space opens up. And interestingly, and I guess I would put 3, 8, 7, and 8 in this category. There's some Enneagram types, even though there are plenty of rebels in that little group I mentioned, that they're fixated behaviors. So the fixated behavior of 4 is what I described, just sort of thinking everything's about me in some way. It's actually called melancholy. The fixated quality of 4 is called melancholy. The fixated expressions of 3, 7, and 8 can be aligned with the expressions of being that are most rewarded by our society. So 3s accomplish things. 7s envision things. They're visionaries. 8s control things and lead things. So those things happen to be rewarded by our society. So in some sense, those types can have a harder path to seeing around their delusions because those delusions happen to be valued in our particular society. So no one gets off scot-free. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. I mean, isn't that, when we talk in, our tradition of the notion of enlightened society, it's like that the notion of non-enlightened society is basically from this framework. It's that you gain rewards by actually fixating on the confused qualities of your being, right?
I really wish I said that in the book too. Because also it's just occurring to me, enlightened society would be a place where all 9 types are honored.
Yeah.
All people, of course, but there's a place. It's not like 8s are better because they are better bosses, but every type has its brilliance, and each of those types of brilliance are recognized.
Yeah.
And honored.
Yeah. I mean, there's nothing wrong with Mark Zuckerberg per se, but when you create a society where, a person who's really good at coding, some of my tech friends say he wasn't even good at that, but I'm going to leave his accomplishment where it was. I'm sure he was good at something. But now you put that person in charge of all intimate human communications with each other.
Oh, geez.
That's not a very enlightened reward.
That's an understatement. Fact.
Right.
This is true.
So is this, I mean, it seems like that's sort of why this work is so important, because you begin to actually sort of understand and then maybe like start to reward yourself with kind of understanding what the wisdom qualities of your way of being are, so that you're kind of crafting a new map of how to like validate your own behavior or practice?
That's definitely where it starts. And then validating the ways of other people, because each type has an arc of attention. Like if the 9 types walk into a room, 9 different things will get their attention, and they're all worthy of attention. But we each think that what we pay attention to is what the other 8 should also be seeing. Or of course they're going to see that first, but they're not. So when you can track someone's arc of attention, you can meet them there. And when you can see around your own attentional pull as only one possibility, there's a chance that you could liberate others from your projections. And I can't really think of anything more important than that. So, for example, my personal husband, Duncan, who you know, is a 1. And the arc of attention goes to right and wrong. That they're attuned to error. They have a comparing mind. There's an idea inside the mind of how things should look or be or feel. And then what's happening out here is always compared to that inner sense of what is right.
Does it also have a sense of like justice, like fairness as well?
Absolutely. I think most Enneagram teachers say Martin Luther King was an 8, but I'm pretty sure he was a 1. Right. They will take a bullet. Literally. I don't mean to make light of that because, of course, it's one of the great tragedies of our lifetimes. Only ones will do that. Because their commitment to ethics is so extraordinary. And so right and wrong can be anything from this is how we fold the laundry to this is how humans should treat other humans. So his attention goes to error, right and wrong. And when he can see where things went wrong, he feels more safe. Okay, now I get a sense of what's going on here. I'm a 4. My attention does not go to right or wrong. My attention goes to meaning. What does this mean? So when we first were having arguments, and now we've been married 23 years, but he would always want to tell me, he would want to assign blame. Either it's my fault or your fault. And our friend Greg Parati, who said that his family had a problem-solving methodology, which was define problem, assign blame, problem solved. And that's so good. We all know that.
Sounds a lot like our political system.
Right? You're to blame. Okay, now we fixed it. So he looks for mistakes and I look for meaning. And so those are 2 really different things to talk about in an argument. And I first thought, why are you talking about that? That is not important or useful. And he thought the same thing about me. But when I could enter our conversations of disagreement by acknowledging error, you screwed this up, or I screwed this up, or something happened that screwed us up. It's a kindness. Yeah. I'm not doing it to be patronizing. I'm doing it to open the channel of communication and to speak his language. You know, that's a really patronizing way to say it. And if he can say to me, well, what does this mean to you? Or how does this feel to you? Then I feel safe. So no one's right or wrong here, but it really helps you connect with others.
You can empathize with their worldview, or you start to see a map of what matters to them which is kind of it's forever fascinating that we're completely alone in our experience, simultaneously trying to share a physical, mental, emotional reality with billions and trillions of other life forms, right? Like nobody's ever going to understand us, but we have to understand each other a little bit if this is going to work.
Yes, agreed. Even to understand that we are strangers is a good starting point to ourselves and to each other.
So did you get Duncan into the Enneagram, or is he also like, no, that's not enough about justice to get my
That's hilarious. Well, as a matter of fact, I did not get him into the Enneagram or Buddhism or meditation. So, those are my passions and interests, but they aren't his.
I'll also
So-
refer everyone to Susan's earlier book, The Four Noble Truths of Love, for more on this particular topic.
More on me and Duncan, right? Yes, thank you. No, yeah, we love each other. That's the main thing we have in common. So,
yeah. I mean, one thought I'm having is because, the sort of the basis, the kind of like rice and beans of Buddhism, including Tantric Buddhism that has these huge ornate conceptual mappings, mandalas of mind and reality, is to get to let go of concepts, right?
mm-hmm.
And so that also feels like a way of navigating like a really precise and sort of ornate and complex system of sort of personality mapping, like the Enneagram is to practice like mindfulness or shamatha meditation, where you're, oh, I'm a 4, he's a 1, and it's like thinking, come back
Mm-hmm.
to your body, come back
Mm-hmm.
to the breath, so that we're not fixated on the map, right?
Yeah, I mean, you can fixate on a map if you think this is going to prevent me from having suffering in my life or solve my problems, which there is no such map. But if you look at the map of this is a map to how to love more deeply, it's a good map.
Yeah.
And people often say, well, I can't be one type, even though the Enneagram says you are. And I agree. I don't want to be put in a box. Cool. But you already are in a box. You put yourself in a box, or karma put you in a box. Would you like to have a diagram of what that box looks like or not? So this is a good diagram for the box that you're already in.
Yeah.
And it's helpful to know I am this type. This is my home base. It's like you were born in New York City, right, Ethan?
I was born in Los Angeles, California.
Oh,
Didn't
Los
stay there
Angeles.
long.
Oh, that's right. Los Angeles. So you will never not have been born in Los Angeles. You will always have been born in Los Angeles, but you can go live anywhere you want. But that piece won't change. And that piece has some meaning or validity even when you left, if you left when you were a few months old. But the Enneagram is kind of like that.
Yeah. So, okay. I want to just close out, because I feel like we really delved into the topic of your new book, which I really, really enjoyed. And
thank you.
And it's out, I believe, as of September 13th, which I believe by the time people are hearing this, it'll be right around that date. So
yes.
should be out.
Guide.
But let's come back to being a Dharma teacher for a moment in the year of our Lord is 2022, in this eruption of the wellness space, and claiming and trusting one's own authority. So can you share sort of any more wisdom on that? Can we riff on that topic for 5 minutes?
I can riff on that topic. Yeah. So I should amend my previous statement. I'm not claiming any authority beyond the authority of my personal experience. And for a long time, as a young person, I'm sure many people have had this experience, I questioned my own understandings. Oh, well, that's not what it says in the book, or that's not how it was explained to me. But of course, at this age, at this point in life, I'm not, that's one of the great things about it, not questioning my own point of view quite as violently. I have what I call the blessing of no credentials. I didn't go to college. I'm not a therapist. I was never an acharya or a senior teacher. And it turns out that was very lucky. I didn't have anything to cast off. So the only thing I had to go on in my own writing and my own teaching is my personal experience. This is what it sounded like to me. This is how I used it. This is what I discovered when I investigated this. And you may discover something different, but this is what I discovered. And therefore what I recommend, which you are free to disregard. So my favorite, I'd say, directive as a teacher, quote unquote, is it doesn't matter what this means. It matters. What matters is what it means to you. Bring your intelligence. You investigate. I will be your friend. I'll help the best I can. This is what it means to me. But now you figure out what it means to you. And I think, the original Buddhist teachings of the Buddha himself were, that's how you should do it. If you see me, you should kill me. I mean, that's a horrible saying, but don't take anyone's word for anything, including mine. And I am the Buddha, not me, but you know what I mean? So I feel comfortable claiming that space of friendship and experience and trust in your intelligence and my own to navigate the path as Sangha. And it's not decentralized, because it's very hard to figure this out, as I'm sure you've had your own experiences with this. There has to be order in a Sangha. But if there's this is a linear Sangha, the Open Heart Project. And it's been very interesting to teach without, levels, but with reverence for the inner levels. Mm. And that's the noble challenge of our lives, I think, Ethan. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if you look at the history of Tantric Buddhism and Tibetan Buddhism, there is a sense of top-down authority, mm-hmm. and like you can do, and other forms of Buddhism have this too, like you can do something when the master says you can, which is, it definitely keeps a stream of authority and a clear lineage that can go for, thousands of years. But at the same time, it's very easy to corrupt that, because
seriously,
it becomes super easy for the master to like you or not like you, rather than to, say you can do this because you're good at it or you're ready, I dislike you, but you're still, you're empowered to do this, and, so that's, and I think what we faced in the Shambhala organization was an even more rigid form of hierarchy, where certain things were held that actually, when you go back, I mean, you and I both precept the Buddhist refuge vows now. And that ability to do so in the Shambhala organization was held incredibly tightly. Sakyong Mipam, decided every single person, and supposedly, since the whole thing has fallen apart, removed the authorization of everybody who was authorized to do that.
Sad.
Well, but when I give the refuge vows, I read the part of Thich Nhat Hanh's Life Story of the Buddha, where the Buddha specifically says, I don't want to be the only one offering new members of the Sangha refuge anymore. I want any monk who has taken the vows to go forth and offer the vows to those who want to enter the Sangha, so that people can do it in their own villages in front of their own families. So
amazing. I'm going to find that passage.
Yeah, it's in Old Path, White Clouds. I can't remember the original sutta or text that it's from. But anyway, but the Buddha is empowering people to decentralize authority. I'm just thinking as a counter example to that rigidity, you have sort of, I'm going to follow my own truth gets very dangerous, as we've seen the last, few years. I mean, you can have a YouTube channel and be an epidemiologist, it's
or claim to be.
Or claim to be.
I know.
Yeah.
So in giving the refuge vow, which I would love someday to talk to you about what that's like for you, I asked my own lineage, Sakyong Mipam, 10 times, can I do this? Because at this point, there are like 8,000 people, 12,000 people, 15,000 people in the Open Heart Project. And many of them wanted to take refuge, or some of them, not many. But I didn't have anywhere to send them, because they lived in Alaska, or they didn't like Shambhala, or they did, but they don't live near a Shambhala center. So I couldn't help them.
Yeah.
And then when he took a powder, I guess is a way to say it, it's just so upsetting still. I had the great good fortune to ask Tulku Thundip Rinpoche, an incredible scholar and deep Nyingma master who I had been talking to my whole practice life for 25 years, because he lives here in the Boston area. And I was introduced to him a long time ago. And so my own meditation teacher said, why don't you ask him if you can give the refuge vow? Because I feel like, and I imagine you feel the same, some kind of gate has to open to do that. And I can't open it by shoving it.
Right.
It has to be an inner, something has to happen on the inside, or somebody has to say, do it. That's how I feel.
Yeah.
And so I said to Tokutunda, what do you think if I gave the refuge vow? And he said, why not? 2 words. And that was the authorization.
Yeah.
And I felt like, okay, good. I got some wind at my back here from that. Why not? And he also said, if you can welcome someone further onto the path that they are already on, you should do so with great joy. And that I felt, okay, T's crossed, I's dotted. Let's do it. How about you?
Yeah. I mean, similar, I asked several people, and, the main sort of person who held a tantric Buddhist lineage, who was a teacher of mine, and a main teacher of mine is Dzogchen Ponlop Rinpoche. And that felt like, I mean, within these lineages, because in the Buddhist world, we're still working through, it's kind of fascinating what's happening, because in the Buddhist world, a couple generations into being in the West, like there's a kind of slow opening of the mode of empowerment. Meanwhile, what's happened in the wellness world is, millions of people, way more than will ever, work with us, listen to the Headspace guy and get a lot.
Okay, cool.
Yep. And I've never heard a negative thing actually said about somebody who uses the Headspace app.
Me neither.
But it's sort of, and I'm sure he actually has the relevant experience and authorization. I don't doubt that, but we don't really know what that is. And so there's this range, and then there's lots of people hanging their shingle and saying, I teach meditation, et cetera, where you're like, okay, what is your lineage? And I feel like empowerment is sort of in anything, actually in any field, is, it's following one's own intuition. And then I think externally there's 3 groups that should be fulfilled, that if one of them has a problem with what you're doing, should at least give you pause. One is, the audience or the students you're working with. What do they want? What are they asking for? 2 is like peers or colleagues. I think we should all have, informally or formally, like a peer group of people who are teaching others. And 3 is the mentors, which I do think are kind of the gatekeepers in some way. I think it's nice to have mentors who are mostly open-hearted, who are, saying to us, do more unless it causes harm, rather than don't do it because I'm scared of losing, my own power in some weird way I can't describe, which was kind of the Shambhala hierarchy. The Shambhala organizational hierarchy, I should say. And I think those are the 4 groups to kind of, check in with. And I think it's important that everybody kind of has those groups. Because if it's just us, then we go into like I'm doing my own research mode, about things, which feels very untrustworthy to me alone,
To me too, 100%. And I love those groups. And yeah, if it's just me, then I'm like just talking out my butt, basically. But if there's these others,
and
people
spreading COVID, but no,
and maybe monkeypox,
and maybe monkeypox. Yeah, I hope not.
I hope not. Yeah, no, I'm fully in agreement with you. I like that schematic very much.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate it. It feels very much, because you did so much study in these areas, it does feel like you're doing a lot of synthesis of the traditions that are relevant to you, especially in this book. And I'm somebody who likes to think in terms of synthesizing, as ways to hold lineage. So Buddhist Enneagram, 9 Paths to Warriorship is the new book from my friend Susan Piver. I highly recommend her books, and that one especially if you're into such topics. And Susan, thanks for being back on the podcast.
Oh, Ethan, it was a complete pleasure. Thank you so much for asking me. It's a complete joy to talk with you.
Okay. And SusanPiver.com is how you Piver.com. If you don't know the spelling of her name, is how you get more information about the Open Heart Project and the rest of her work. So thank you again, Susan. And for the Road Home podcast, this is Ethan Nichtern. We'll see everyone next time.